Hi, Daisy. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Okay, so tell the listeners who you are and a little bit about your new book, which is called Burnt Out to Lit Up.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I am Daisy Auger-Domínguez. I am a chief people officer, an author, a speaker, and an advisor on future readying workplaces. I have worked, as my grandmother likes to say, everywhere. I have worked in all across all industries, um, at Moody's Investor Service, Time Warner, Disney, Google, Viacom. Most recently, I was chief people officer at Vice Media. And over the course of my career, but especially over the last couple of years, I have seen burnout steal the light out of the most passionate people I work with, including myself. I wasn't just burnt out; I was burnt crispy. And so I wrote. I took a sabbatical last year after I left my role at Vice, and I wrote a book about not just burnout, but how to find joy in leading people. And I wanted to be uh, a little loosey with the title, right? I didn't want it to be like this is just a book just for managers or it's a book just for leaders. It's for any of us who are responsible, whether it's one person or thousands of people. Most of us in our jobs, and I understand many of your readers are folks who work in organizations, and we're going to be made responsible for someone at one point or another. And I wanted to focus on how do we find joy as a colleague and as a manager, right? How
Yeah.
do we reignite that joy that helps us, really get up in the morning and be excited about what we have to do?
Yeah, it's interesting. We were just talking about this on an episode a few back about middle managers seem to be
Yeah.
getting the burnt crispy, as in is your words, that
Yeah.
like the worst. And I'm kind of curious, what did you, I guess, like everyone to some extent, I feel like has been burnt out or has lost some of that joy. I would say in the last like 4 or 5 years, it's been really interesting. Is there a particular group you've seen the most
Mm.
burnt out or kind of getting hit the hardest? Like, again, we were talking about middle managers, and I was like, yeah, it is
Yeah.
tough to be a middle manager. I feel for them.
Yeah, I think yes, and that's precisely why I wrote Burnt Out to Lit Up specifically for those middle managers, right? Those people who are responsible for leading folks. I wanted to speak directly to those of us who are caught in the crossfires between the relentless demands and often unrealistic expectations from the top, but also from the bottom,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's coming from all sides, and it's sort of it's funny enough, but it's been um the least joyful part of my book tour so far. So today marks a month since my book launched, and I have done over 30 talks and podcasts and LinkedIn lives, all the things to get the word out. And across every industry, and I've talked in for-profit space and the nonprofit space. I have talked to folks at all levels, from junior levels to senior levels. Everyone is tired.
Yeah.
There is this collective exhaustion. And I thought of that last year when I started writing the book, but I had no idea um what a moment burnout was going to have, which is like right now everyone's talking about burnout, but it is really every group. And if you talk to executives and leaders, they're like, "Oh, I have it the worst, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
responsible for all these leaders." If you talk to HR folks who are my people, right? We're like, "Oh," right? And I talk about that specifically in the book. Like we hold space and we hold people's hearts, and we are like, right, we are taking care of all the things that nobody sees because you're not supposed to see what we do, right? But our
Right.
jobs is to make sure that your working conditions are as safe and as healthy and as productive as possible. And then you talk to middle managers, which I think middle managers never get enough love, to be fair, which is
Yeah.
why I wanted to give them love in this book. And then you talk to middle managers and they're like, yes, and nobody equipped me for what's going on, right? And my leaders are having a hard time with all of this because they're hugely unstable and trying to hold on to old relics of management that no longer work because work
Yeah.
has changed dramatically. And then the employees that work for me, I love it. They have found voice, but it just sounds like they're screaming all the time, right? And they are not, right? We are in this, I call this messy middle, right? Where we're not really leaning on each other or building shared understanding, where each side is just kind of going, okay, like I'm just gonna stay in my righteous place right now and not move. So it really is across the board. and I wish I could tell you is one specific group, but even someone told me the other day, oh, your Gen Zers are not stressed out. I was like, oh my goodness, like these young people are also stressed out. Because think about it, most of them started their careers during the pandemic, right? They don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
They have not seen work modeled for them. They're basing their experiences of work on social memes and Instagram and TikTok accounts. And they, like all of us, I started my career many years ago, right? I'm an Xer. Like all of us, they need direction. They crave clarity. They deserve managers and leaders who are lit up and who are going to light the way for them. And they're not getting it either.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Like if you're starting your career kind of in this negative place, you don't know what positive looks like, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in your book, joy is sort of the medicine that we all need.
Yes.
So what's the science behind and maybe the correlation between burnout and joy, and why does, it's a word I love and I don't see it used a lot in the career space, sadly.
No, no.
So talk about the relationship between burnout and why joy kind of like, helps with that a little bit.
Yeah, like when I started writing the book, I was very clear that this is both of my books. My first book is called Inclusion Revolution, and it's about inclusion in the workplace. And this is about burnout. But both of them are what I call modern management books. And this one felt a little softer for me than the traditional strategies that I shared in my first one. And I was really cognizant of, or maybe I was overly worried that it was going to come across as too woo-woo, right? Like she's talking about joy and nobody talks about joy at work. But that's also why I wanted to talk about it. I was like, because we're all human, right? And for some reason, we were all told, right, part of the Industrial Revolution transition of organizations, like that we had to leave our human outside, right? Like
Yeah.
come and be this, this robot when you come into the workplace. And we all know that never worked, right? We hid those parts of ourselves. Many of us would walk into workplaces with these emotional protective gear, right, for what we are going to experience. And in the reduction of joy, I believe we stop being ourselves, and that for which we were hired, right, that for which we were hired to do and be, gets sucked out of us. And so I did research. I wanted to really get a sense of like does joy play a part at work? And to your point, it's like, is there a connection to burnout? And the Institute for Healthcare Improvement um, uh, released studies that say that when you increase joy at work, it's better than trying to reduce burnout. And so what I mean by that is that in many organizations, and how I started even positing questions for interviewers when I was researching for the book, my questions would be like, how do we reduce burnout? How do we avoid burnout? How do we stop burnout? And then I started turning it around and go, no, no, how do we increase joy? Right? What does that look like? And that's how I came across this research, because it says that if we increase joy at work, right, if we focus on that as the outcome, that improves employee satisfaction. That helps reduce cortisol levels, which are our stress hormones, right? It enhances overall well-being and connectivity in organizations, which then, right, will lead to reduced burnout and that magical data point that most organizations are looking for, higher engagement levels, right? Every company I've ever worked for measures engagement in their employee surveys, in different data collecting mechanisms, right? They want to know, how do we improve engagement? Because if we improve engagement, then we improve output in organizations. Well, we've been looking at the wrong things to do, right? We have been focusing so much on, okay, well, we're just going to focus on reducing burnout, and we're gonna do the things that, partly the things that we should do, which is reviewing workloads, reviewing management levels, reviewing all those structural pieces. I was like, that's part of it. But we also have to be focusing on, how do we make work joyful, right? How do we reduce the obstacles to satisfaction and to connection and to purpose? We tend to use these words separately, like your purpose is this, and build connection, because we are right now quite isolated, and we are, as the Surgeon General has declared, the US is going through a loneliness epidemic, right? Like we are so socially apart, and that increases our dissatisfaction with our work, right? It makes us just, sad and wimpy, right? So how do we improve that so that we can actually create workplaces where joy and optimism are the norm, not the maybe side effect?
Yeah, that I mean, you bring up so many good points there, and I haven't thought about it like that before. I've always thought of, let's address burnout and then it will bring joy versus what it reminds me of is if you've ever heard of like Strengths Finder, Marcus
Yes.
Buckingham, he's like, stop
Of course.
focusing on your weaknesses, instead of focus on your strengths. And it kind of feels a little bit like that. Like, let's stop focusing on the burnout piece, but we'll naturally kind of get that by addressing the joy part.
And,
Yeah,
and I want to be mindful that because I have been mostly by Gen Zers, I have been um, questioned about this approach, and in this sort of this sense of like, well, you're going to gaslight us into trying to find joy when work is really bad, right? And I want to be very clear. Burnout, and I say this several times throughout my book. Burnout is not an individual failure point, right? Burnout is a result of systemic failures. It's a definition of work that no longer works. It is systems and processes that keep working parents and individuals from different identities, right? Like having to load up different layers of things that they have to do in addition to their job, right? So there's
right.
all of these systemic pieces that are impacting it. However, my point, and as you're mentioning, my point around focusing around joy is to a little bit like the Strengths Finder piece is to remind us of the agency that we have, right? Like in a space and moment where you may feel like you have nothing, right? Like that you're just a cog in the wheel. And it's like, no, you actually have agency. You have agency to imagine a different way of work, and you have agency to ask for what you need. You may not be able to get it depending on your organizational context. You may not be able to get all the things, but you have agency to negotiate what that looks like so that you can produce at your best, right? Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we come to work, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
it's like it's called labor for a reason. It's not supposed to be like the funnest every moment of the day. It is supposed to be, it's supposed to be exertion at some points. It's supposed to sometimes I like to talk about what burnout isn't versus what it is. Sometimes I'm like, burnout isn't just like being mad at your colleague because they let you down, or being upset because Wi-Fi once again is no longer working and
Yeah.
they're right. Like these are the day-to-day stressors, to be fair, but kind of like annoyances about work, right?
Totally.
Burnout is more about sustained exhaustion, sustained cynicism, a sense of lack of professional efficacy, right? Like nothing I can do is right? All of that. And I do fundamentally believe that if we can um, tackle those pieces from, okay, I can't control all of this, but I can control how I show up. And I can control how I engage with my peers and my colleagues and my bosses in a way that allows me to breathe, right? See what's happening in front of me versus like what I'm like all the monkeys in my head are imagining is really, I'm like, no, that's not really happening, right? What's happening
Yeah.
is this, and I'm going to show up differently. And I'm going to do that in a way that brings me joy because that's what grounds me when everything else is going bananas.
As someone who has a toddler, this is reminding me of like self-regulation. Like we're trying to teach her like
Yes.
how to like regulate your emotions, and it's like, oh, we as adults, and someone was telling me with toddlers, they're like, no, there's not a one and done thing. I'm like, I clearly know that I'm an adult, and it's not a one and done thing with adults either. So
Totally.
I feel like we're just applying like self-regulation to like joy regulation. So I love this. Okay, you have specific strategies that
Mhm.
leaders and really anybody can use to summon joy, hope, and optimism in their workday. And I'd love
Yes.
if we could go through each one. I know they're super tangible because people who are listening to this, who are on board with this, might be asking, okay, I get it. I like the word joy. Sounds like something I would want more of, but how do I actually do it? So, number one on your list was find your why. Can you
Yes.
explain how to do that and why that matters?
So you're finding your why is really about connecting with yourself, right? Is that level of self-awareness that requires you to really think about what is it that drives all that you do, right? Like, what is it that motivates you? What is it that inspires you? And it's based on the Japanese concept of ikigai, which roughly translated means a reason for being, right? Like, why do we exist, right? That is the perennial question we ask ourselves our entire lives, right? And that reason for being is your whether you want to call it your purpose, right? Whether you want to call it what makes you happy, right? What brings you fulfillment, satisfaction, but also like what meets your basic needs, right? All of these elements. And that sense of finding your why is about finding meaning and also contentment with who you are. So again, going back to the self-regulation, right? Is getting to a place of like, this is who I am. This is what I'm meant to do in this world. And I in an article that I wrote recently at HBR, and then I also in my book talk about the book Ikigai, the Japanese secret to a long and happy life. Think about that, a long and happy life. Like, don't we all want that?
Yeah.
By Hector
Sign
Garcia
me
and
up.
yes, and Francesc Miralles. And it begins with, which is what I love, because I come from my work comes from a very deep sense of reflection, right? Asking ourselves not just um different questions, but asking ourselves better questions. So I love the questions that they ask. The first is, what activities and pursuits bring you joy and enthusiasm? Like, that sounds pretty basic, right? But like, how many times have we done an audit of like our
Right.
joy, right? Like what is it? Because when you start seeing that, you start seeing patterns of like, I am happiest when I do XYZ, right? And then the second question is, what skills and talents do you possess for the greater good, right? This is a bit of like the impact that we want to have in the world. All of us, whether we're just creating widgets or are, conducting life-changing initiatives, right? We all want to positively impact our world, big or small. So what is it that you're good at, right? What is it that you are uniquely positioned to do? I have a 16-year-old, so I'm constantly trying to ask her, she's getting prepared for applying to colleges, and she's like, do I need to know who I'm gonna be and what I'm gonna do? I'm like, babe, like it took me like a couple of years and I'm still figuring it out. Right? But like I didn't declare my major for another year and a half. But the question I would ask myself is not what major I want to take, but it is like, what is it that I'm good at and that gets me very excited and that I want to study, right? That I want to learn more about, that I want to be more curious about, right? So in that is where you figure out what your calling is. And the third question is, how can you be acknowledged and rewarded for your contributions to the world? I.e., how do you put food on the table and a roof over your head doing that kind of work? Because many of us may want to, do certain things that may never be able to pan out for us in that way. I was like, well, what does that look like? Like, how can you translate that into the work that we do? And then the fourth one is, how can you make a positive impact on others and the world at large, right? So this is about not just the impact that you want to have, but really, what does the world need more of? Right? Like, it's not just like, I want to just do this because I want to do this, but it's like, where does that help make my community, my organization, the broader set, my family, right? Whatever that set of think about it as the region that you want to impact. What does that look like? And that, when you answer those questions, it's not just about gaining clarity on what you're supposed to do, but it also becomes kind of this fuel for you, right? Because this is where I talk about fire a lot, way too much throughout the book, right? I use all sorts of different symbolisms. I had a lot of fun with it. But I also talk about the good fire, right? It's about, how do you burn bright, not out, right? How do you like rekindle that fire that is just uniquely you? And when you align your work with those elements of passion and purpose, all of a sudden that's what generates energy for you. And I
Yeah.
use an example, in the article, right? Like, I love mentoring people, no matter what age. Like, I love sitting down with folks and going like, how can I help you? Like, how can I help, make your next steps better? And that to me is not a suck energy type of activity. That's actually an additive energy. So when I do that, I am actually replenishing my social battery, if you will, and my energy. And so I know that because I am good at that. I am good at problem solving. I have worked for many years and been in the business of making work better. And so I can sit down. I was helping a friend today, negotiating a new role in the organization. And she is one of the most brilliant people I know. And she just paused and she said, "You have a skill set that I do not have." That is so exciting. And that's exciting for me. I was like, "You're right." I was like, you have a skill set that I do not have. And I gain benefit from learning from you. And the fact that I can help make your day better, help make your next job even better because you're going to negotiate the heck out of it to get the best benefits for you. That's that's my ikigai. That's my why.
I love that. I've heard of this before, but I like the way you broke it down because I haven't been able to like translate it from the book to that exactly. And it's almost like, what are you good at that will also pay you and that you feel like you're making a contribution with? And I think we have this human need to want to be doing that. So that makes a lot of
Yes.
sense why that fuels the joy for people.
Mhm.
Okay, number two on your list is embrace a beginner's mindset, and number three is sprinkle gratitude. Maybe we can
Yeah.
combine those two.
Sure. So the beginner's mindset, it really is just that, is try to remember what it was like for especially for those of us who have been working for a long time. It's kind of like I've seen this movie play out before, and and I'm not even gonna entertain a different outcome because I know it ends this way.
Right.
And that's, like some of us think that that's the right way to look at it, but it actually limits us from coming up with different alternate endings to that movie. So it is thinking about what is different here, right? And how do you I quote Shunryu Suzuki, who's the author of the Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and I say that in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the
Right.
expert's mind there are few. So
Right.
how do we free ourselves from past knowledge and biases and and see them for what they are, which can be helpful, but also obstacles for seeing something differently. And then think about, okay, what could be different here? These are the kind of questions that I ask myself and that I ask my teams. What can we learn from this, right? How could we see this differently? What would this look like, right? If like let's presume that all of this is true, what could this be? What could be a very different ending for this? And this is not only good for you as an individual, but if you're managing people, right? I call it the tell me more attitude, right? Like, tell me more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you said this, but it was like, but let's think about this. Think about the manager that comes to you and tells you everything's on fire, everything's awful, and this place is gonna, explode without me. I was like, okay, so let's assume that all of that is true. So I am looking, I was like, what what does that say about you? Right? What does that say about where you are? Right? So it is trying to think about a beginner's mind and taking away the pressure of having an answer to creating several answers. And then
Right.
the third one, it's one of my favorites, is sprinkle gratitude and joy like confetti. And I got that expression from a colleague of mine, a board member who introduced confetti committee to our board meetings. And it
I
was
love that.
at every board meeting, we would all have to send little videos or photos of things that we were proud of, right? And then at the beginning of each board meeting, we would show those kind of like in a video reel and share little snippets that we each added to those images. And it was like sprinkling like joy and gratitude because we would all clap and we would all feel warm and fuzzy towards each other. And then at the end of that, we could all go into like making really gnarly and tough decisions in a very different way. I could disagree with someone that vehemently, but still know that I just saw a photo of their 2-year-old doing something really cute, and that humanizes them in a different way, right? And so I can still argue with you and we can still get to a better outcome, but I'm not going to vilify you. I'm not going to other you because you and I have had that connection, right? We've spread that joy and that confetti. And you can do that, goodness, all the time, right? You can do that by celebrating small wins, by lightening the mood and reducing stress in meetings, by simply making sure that you're recognizing your team members at the beginning of a meeting or at the end, right? But creating spaces where people in the day-to-day grind of work feel themselves valued and recognized, right? And they feel like, ooh, like work is hard, but I had these feel good moments. And, and I just went into this meeting and my energy level was like a 1. And now my energy level is a 4 because I just got a nice pat on the back. And by the way, that isn't just like a random thing that happens. It's a ritualized experience that I know my manager and my leaders believe in. And that you can't, I've seen it. I've seen folks that are just like so downtrodden and tight to anything coming to the world to them, right? Just like, oh, everything sucks, and I don't want to put one foot in front of the other. And all of a sudden, you have a meeting where you lighten the mood, you show some love, you show some gratitude, and they walk out of those meetings with a different pep in their step. It happens to all of us. It's a natural human need, and we seem to forget it in the process of like getting stuff done. We
Yeah.
forget that we forget that creating a shortcut to getting things done is actually building connections with each other.
Absolutely. I like your point about like taking time to recognize what people are doing and the value they're creating. I think it's, us as a society are so bad at kind of like celebrating our own wins, right? We
Oh,
just move on to the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And it's kind of like that's created in the work culture too. And it feels really, really good when someone stops and recognizes your hard work, or you're like, I didn't even know if that person knew I was doing that.
oh my gosh,
And it
yes.
feels so good. And like, what a simple way to also like bring joy. I mean, to your point about um, creating your own joy is also like bringing joy to other people, right?
Yes, yes, it spreads, right? That the whole point is we tend to feel that or we've been told these stories that when we're too joyful, right, it's just like it's silly. Or when you just tap, someone and say that something's great, I was like, it feels selfish, it feels limited. I was like, no, you're actually spreading it even wider because you're modeling to others what it looks like to interact in a positive way, right? And positive psychologists have been saying this for years, right? Like this is not something that's new. There is research to indicate that when we show kindness and empathy towards each other, like neurologically and physically, our body responds to these actions and impacts in a positive way, and it reduces our stress hormones, right? It increases oxytocin. And like this is not woo-woo stuff that doesn't make sense. Like this has been scientifically proven. And if we don't have to do all the things, but if we just implement one or two of these practices in our day to day, the impact on our teams can just be outsized.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to the last one, which is fuel your own joy. And I
Yes.
also, while you say this tip, I also want you to share, as we're nearing the end of the year, what is one thing you would encourage someone to do maybe this week to fuel their own joy?
Oh, I love that. So my number one practice in fueling my joy is what I call the happy folder. And I keep that on my desktop, but sometimes like people will send you notes like this one that I have here in front of me, and it's on a hard copy, and I was like, I'll take a photo and I'll add it there. And it's just filled with positive feedback, right? Comments that are memorable, and that for me on those really, really hard days, it reminds me that I actually like I've been doing something right. Right? Those moments when you like just go into your head and I'm just like, I'm the worst. I can't get anything done. I failed everyone around me. It's like, actually, right? Like last week I got something from a team member that said, thank you so much, Daisy. It's one of the notes that I share in the article. When I was leaving my last job, one of my colleagues sent me a note and it said, I know you advocate for us, even though we may not see it, but we sense it. And that note, I mean, I still, this is a year plus that I left, and I still reference it because it meant the world to me at a time that I was so burnt crispy and feeling so much shame and exhaustion about leaving my team. And it reminded me I have done what I could for them, and they feel valued, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not like, "Ooh," and they're grateful for me, right? And it's just like they feel valued. But also and by the way, the happy folder, I was sharing it recently, and someone said, "Oh, I have one of those. I call it data that matters." And I just love that. I love that. I was like, right, because all of us, some of us are more tech driven and data driven, and some of us are more emotive. Whatever you call it, make it about something that really helps refuel you and energizes you. And then the other piece that I share is that, and I think you were almost going there earlier, is we're just not good at even like saying good job to us, right?
Yeah.
Before I started writing this book, I used to be very anti mantras. I used to think like they were woo woo stuff, like other people do that, I don't do that. And then I realized, I'm like, I have a lot of quotes around my office. I like quotes because I feel like they're inspirational. Like, they're not that far off from a mantra,
Yeah.
right? I was like actually, I have been impersonating a mantra lover for a really long time. And so, like mantras like you are worthy. It is okay. I am safe, right? Like those moments that help us just reduce the tension and calm our nervous systems, which I don't know about yours, but mine is usually an overdrive, right? Especially when there's stress around me. And reduce that our go-to for self-criticizing ourselves. Instead of just like saying, I'm like, the feedback that I would often give my team is like, oh, like why don't we stop being a little less critical, and like why don't we show kindness towards our colleagues and see how that changes. And I'm like, you know what, why don't I apply that to me and
Yeah.
be less self-critical to myself and be a little kinder to me, and tell me, like, the things that I tell myself is, you know what, you messed up today, and it's okay to mess up, right? I talk about it in Burnt Out to Lit Up. I share one of the practices that I share is to reframe old narratives. And the old narratives that I used to tell myself is that I needed to over control and overwork in order to be respected. And so
Right.
now I tell myself the opposite. I do not need to work myself to the ground to be respected. I do not need to control every aspect of that action in order to be successful and in order for me to keep my job, right? And it's just constantly reminding myself of what is really happening and what are the aspects of my job that bring me joy, right? That keep me here, and that positively influence not just my experience, but the experience of those that I lead and connect with.
Yeah, and I think also vice versa, if you were making that list and you're like, I'm really not getting a lot of these things here, it might make you feel like, okay, I'm giving myself permission to leave this job and go somewhere else. And now I have this insight to wherever I go next, I can look for that. I mean, I love everything you're saying. And I'm curious, what is your go-to mantra? Like if you had to pick one, what's one that you love?
The easiest one is I am safe. I have to remind myself of that. Most of us operate from this fight or flight mode where the anxiety that we're feeling inside, we believe that it's coming from an actual real threat. And most of the time it's just a perceived threat, right?
Right,
So for me, it's reminding me I am safe. And then when I get to that place, it's okay, what's really happening, right? That colleague yelled at me. I was like, it's not about me, right?
right,
They happen to be having a bad day. My manager gave me really tough feedback. They're not telling me that I am inept and that I should be leaving the company, right? They're telling me that they actually respect and value me and they want me to be better at XYZ. Or, as you noted, I'm getting enough of these really awful messages, and I am in a good place where I can see that they're being thrown at me unfairly, and that it's consistent and that it's part of a toxic workplace culture. That's my signal to leave,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But doing it from a place where, like I said earlier, my nervous system is calm enough to really have situational awareness, right? Really have a deep sense of what is really happening here. And I'll tell you my favorite mantra to share when I am particularly trying to change and create change for organizations is that change is possible. Whenever I
yeah.
feel like, oh my gosh, this is never right, like your go-to is like, this is never gonna work. For me, it's all about reframing. And I was like, you know what? Change is possible. It's not happening today, but it is still possible.
Right, right. Like baby steps. It will
Yes.
happen. This is fantastic advice and I think very timely as we kind of
Mm.
wrap up 2024 and start thinking about, how can we bring some joy back to our workplaces, our work relationships, our day-to-day jobs. So really, really helpful advice. Daisy, tell people where they can learn more about you, buy your book. I know you do some public speaking, so share all the things and we'll put all of that in the show notes as well.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much. You can find me on my website, daisyoj-dominguez.com. My community's LinkedIn because I'm a geek about all things work. So you can find me at daisyoj-dominguez there. And then for more fun, lighter fare, sometimes, maybe not all the time, Instagram also. That one's Daisy AD.
Amazing. So we'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much. And the book is called Burnt Out to Lit Up. And you guys, I'll make sure that's also in the show notes. Thank you.
It is available everywhere books are sold.